presentar el libro de poemas Areas of Consolation, cuyo autor, John Lydie, a continuación nos leerá algunos de sus más bellos poemas, amenizados por el flautista Chris Dove. También nos acompañan a este acto memorable el editor Mr. Taylor y el sociólogo y escritor Mr. Devereux. Para finalizar el acto habrá un turno de palabras moderado por doña Sara Cantó, a la cual le cedo la palabra en estos momentos.
Good evening. We are delighted to welcome our friends from Limerick. And now John is going to let us know to listen.
Please.
Mrs. Keller.
Okay, now, Marina, I hope you're on the ball here. This is something my mother used to like. She used to sing this. Singing that song. And now we begin. I think with
Bueno, buenas tardes de nuevo para los amigos ateneístas que no saben inglés y para los españoles que tampoco lo saben y nos acompañan y que no conocen a John. Voy a leer unas breves notas biográficas. John Lydie nació en Cork y creció en Limerick. Sus libros más recientes son Madrid and Other Poems y Areas of Consolation. Entre sus traducciones se encuentra I'll Be Down, traducción al inglés de Tosigo Ardento de José María Álvarez. Tiene unos cuentos cortos en inglés para niños y también en español. Es editor fundador, junto con Jim Borg, de Stony Thursday Book, que parece ser que es una de las reseñas literarias más antiguas de Irlanda, y ha coeditado con Dominic Taylor An Anthology of Reactions and Let Us Rise, una antología que conmemora el Soviet de Limerick, 1919-2019. Es profesor y bibliotecario y reside en Madrid. John vino a España en los 80. 82. Su mentora fue Pamela Mali, a quien rendimos tributo en el Ateneo de Madrid. Era del Partido Comunista y pedagoga. Y era como, en cierta manera, tu contacto desde Limerick a Madrid. Sean es joyciano, viene habitualmente a las reuniones de la Bloomsday Society y la inspiración de Joyce se nota en su obra.
Sí,
¿no?
gusta mucho de Joyce en este poema.
Aries of Consolation es el himno de John Lydie a Limerick, una de las ciudades más importantes pero menos célebres de Irlanda. Sin paralelos pretenciosos, Lydie emprende un viaje a través del tiempo en su Limerick natal, compartiendo sus descubrimientos. Arias es un cofre del tesoro de la historia, la gente, los lugares, los hechos, la tradición, los recuerdos, las anécdotas, lo popular, las referencias, las expresiones, las tradiciones, las alegrías, las tragedias, los amores. La lista es interminable y está escrita con una frescura y energía que atraviesan las páginas como el centro neurálgico de Andalucía, ¿puede ser?
Sí.
Y siempre está la alegría del lenguaje. Lydie está bien equipado para el viaje y el resto de Arias es un registro de lo que presencia, el allanamiento de archivos y un profundo respeto por la memoria popular. Arias es la noche estrellada de Limerick, una colección que redefine un trabajo de amor. Nada en Limerick se compara. Es un logro prodigioso, un monumento a la urbs antica. Piensa en el Dublín de Joyce, piensa en Areas of Consolation de John Lydie. Muchas gracias.
Prize winners for literature. This is a measure and a fitting recognition of the consistent strength of Spanish writing and the Spanish imagination. So to begin, I'd like to start with a little my own personal history first. The Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh wrote, "A man innocently dabbles in words and rhymes and finds it is his life." Speaking personally, that's how it has been for me over the past 20 years. 13 of those years were spent at the weekly poetry night in Gleason's White House Bar in Limerick. And since April 2003, when the late Barney Sheehan first started what he called the White House Poetry Revival, and in those early days there was an evangelical feel about such an event. His aim, which became my aim, was to break down the perceived privilege that surrounded the poetry scene in Limerick by making it accessible and democratising the opportunity for poetry to be read in public, a work I subsequently pursued and still pursue at the Limerick Writers' Centre and Revival Press. No one had to wait for an invite to read at the White House Poetry Revival. If you had a poem you had written, or indeed someone else had written, you could read it at the open mic. And over the years, countless number of people did just that. Some became serious writers, others expressed themselves either in celebration or commemoration of events that happened to them or they felt strongly about. In other words, it had become a community of poets and poetry. A community, as John Liddy says in Arias, a community of an unstoppable flow. One of the quotations that we at the Limerick Writers' Centre have adopted is by the Nobel Prize-winning poet Pablo Neruda, who said, "Poetry is like bread. It should be shared by all, by our vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity." And that is what we do, like we are doing here tonight. We like to describe the Limerick Writers' Centre as a place to inspire and be inspired. And our mission has always been to be a strong voice for literature, arts and culture, based on democracy of opportunity, the community, and a participatory, cooperative culture. So we encourage writers, from the serious, career-minded, to people who write for pleasure, healing, personal growth, insight, or just to inform. And over the years, we have produced a broad range of writing, including poetry, history, memoir, and general prose. We believe that there is an intrinsic value and profound importance on the artistic and communal value of community publishing, as it serves to memorialise our cultural history, fosters a literary community, and inspires a passion for reading and literature. And also, what better than a book to promote the universal values of literacy, peace, love, and genuine humanness. When we publish a book by a local author, we feel that in some way they are giving voice to our traditions and cultural inheritance. Our writers, like John Liddy, become an agent for this giving of voice, causing us to reflect on ourselves and our place and our culture. What once we may have taken for granted or ignored, the writer makes it dynamic and alive, and by writing about it, he or she is also contributing to changes in our culture. As the French philosopher Jacques Derrida has noted, memory is always an act. It is always something performed by a human subject in the present. John Liddy's Arias is a complex act of memory, which gives life to our past. It is a commemoration of Limerick's past, providing us with a new way of looking at ourselves. In the book, Irish Poetry After Choice, the author Dylan Johnson says that there is a connection between the place and the language it nurtures. And I believe that John Liddy has used his connections with Limerick, historical, social, cultural, and by using in many parts of this book-linked poem the vernacular and place names of and names of Limerick people, deepens this connection, inviting us, using the aesthetic language of poetry, to see the place as if for the first time. Combined with the drawings of Limerick artist John Shinners, he touches on and weaves questions of identity, belonging and home, transforming them and us in the process. John has used the magic of words to recreate Limerick using the power of language, and he makes that language universally understood. In many ways, he's attempting to restore and renew our inheritance. I like to think that when we publish a book in Limerick that we are speaking to a global audience. Whether or not that person understands English, the sound and sensory nature of language combined with rhyme and rhythm convey a universal cultural experience, even if this is an unconscious experience. Ares is a good example of this, as even contemporary generations of Limerick people will not always readily relate to the words of this poem on the page, but like a bat squeak in the deep heart's core of the unconscious mind, there will be some recognition. I believe that John Liddy has captured the essential details of Limerick in this work. We all know about Joyce's Dublin, Zola's Paris, Yeats's Sligo, Heaney's Mossbawn. I think we can now rightly refer to Liddy's Limerick.
The first tune I played was Lament for Limerick. This one is called Auran na Leabhar, Song of the Book, and it was written by a poet who moved from Valentia Island to the mainland. But when the boat that was full of his books and his belongings was crossing the harbour, it sank. There was a storm, the wind blew up, and it sank. Initially, the poet blamed the boatman, but he was persuaded later by the boatman's sister that it was more to do with the storm. And he wrote this song, this tune, the Song of the Book.
Liddy is more an or dom a bhean seo nóid oilen in Madrid leis na cara an fila as Limerick John Liddy. Tá lón ceangailte idir an Spáin agus éireann trí litríocht, polítíocht agus an cultúr. Mhuile buchas do Revival Press agus agurthóir Dominic Taylor a chur an leabhar seo fáil. Distinguished guests, the Liddy family, it's a great honour for me to be here in this beautiful setting in Madrid this evening with my friend and fellow poet, Limerick man John Liddy. it's particularly fitting, given the many connections between Spain and Ireland through literature, politics and culture. I want to thank Revival Press and its managing editor, the really energetic Dominic Taylor, for publishing this very important poetry book. I was honoured, I was particularly pleased when Revival Press asked me to write the introduction to this really important poem, this book-length poem, Arias of Consolation. Because as you will hear in a moment, John Liddy is a person that I have admired for a very long period of time. John and myself and Dominic, we all come from literally within a stone's throw of each other in Limerick City, on the south side of Limerick City in Ireland. One of my most treasured possessions in my book collection at home is a slim collection of poetry edited by a poet called John Dillon. It was published in 1981 and it was called Mixed Bag, and it included work by John Liddy. And I was then, in 1981, I was 16, I was interested in punk rock and trying to be different and all the rest of it. And John's poem in that collection was called On Being Called Scum. And it had this captivating line which really appealed to me. Since scum is what you say I am, then I'm in good company, for scum is what rises to the top. And that line spoke directly to me in the same way as Bob Geldof's angry lyrics did in Looking After Number One, or when I heard the screaming of Johnny Rotten, his venomous refrain in a song like Pretty Vacant. Back then, I was 16, as I said, and I was a 16-year-old with notions. I came from a corporation, a council estate on the south side of Limerick, as John and Dominic did. And for me then, punk rock, poetry and socialist politics were my keys to understanding discrimination and snobbery in a highly class-conscious city such as Limerick. And Limerick is, I think, given its size, it's a relatively small city. My late father described it more as being like a provincial town than a city. And class consciousness and class discrimination, in my experience, was quite pronounced there when I was growing up. But I was lucky because I lived in a house with books. I had parents who were socially aware, and we also had this wonderful figure in Limerick, Jim Kenny, a socialist politician who published indeed much work by John in its early editions. He published a journal called the Old Limerick Journal. And reading John's work, reading the Old Limerick Journal, reading the books and sharing ideas with my parents at home, all of these contributed to my wider education about the world and the value and importance of a working class voice. Dominic talks about democracy, about the importance of Revival Press being a voice, a tool for people from all sorts of backgrounds, and it certainly is that, and that certainly appealed to me. And I suppose when I looked around me in Jamesborough and Rathban, that John writes a great deal about in his work over the years, my determination grew as somebody who wanted to be a writer, who wanted to be a professor, or whatever idea I had about myself, when I realised that so-called ordinary people, and the ordinary people is in inverted commas, people who were ordinary from my side of the tracks, like John Liddy and like the wonderful artist John Shinners, who illustrates this beautiful book, and many others, could express their experiences through poetry, through painting, through songwriting. It's Liddy's profound ability to see the poetic in the everyday, and his focus on our local landscape of Rathban and Jamesborough, these all served to quickly make me a lifelong fan of his writing. John Liddy's work has been a source of solace and inspiration. My strong connection with his work, however, doesn't just stem from the commonalities we share in terms of background, worldview, or locality. John's generous encouragement of other writers, his editorial and translation work here in Madrid and in Limerick, his energetic readings, his organisation of poetry festivals, and his consistent level of poetic output over time are all testimony to his achievements and his much deserved status in Ireland and beyond as a poet. I see John Liddy as being this really important bridge between the castle poets in 1960s Limerick, early 1970s Limerick, and the newer waves of Limerick writers. His poem Pound, referring to Ezra Pound, his poem Pound devalued in White House in 1977, which was inspired by a headline written by my late uncle, the poet and journalist Seamus O'Cinneide, is also a personal favourite from his early years. Liddy's co-founding of the Stony Thursday book with Jim Burke in August 1975, his publications The Well, The Secret Heart of Things, Madrid and Other Poems, and his co-edited book with Dominic Taylor, 1916-2016, An Anthology of Reactions, are ample evidence of a poet solidly dedicated to his craft. Living and working here in Madrid since 1982, but closely connected to Limerick and to Ireland. John visits us, thankfully, quite frequently, and I very much enjoy his company when he does visit Limerick and reads and so on. John is fluent, as you know, in not only in English, but in Irish and in Spanish. He is an Irish poet, strongly influenced by the places that he has lived. The touchstones of Rathbane, Jamesborough and Madrid loom large in his work, as do Liddy's wider reading of an extensive range of poets and writers. And so to the book itself, this wonderful book. Across 8 movements, Arias of Consolation is an epic poem, beautifully embellished with the work of the renowned artist John Shinners. It is arguably, I think, the most important poem written about Limerick since the Bard of Thomond's poem, Bard Hogan's poem, Drunken Thady and the Bishop's Lady in 1861. And I don't say that lightly. Arias of Consolation is a major poem. It is an important poem. Given the city of Limerick's long tradition of musicality, stretching from the smoky dance halls on the Ballysimon Road that John writes about, and Mulgrave Street, to the beautiful sean-nós, old-style Gaelic inflected voice of Dolores O'Riordan singing with the Cranberries, from its many musical societies to the hip-hop, now very vibrant in the city of Limerick, of the Russengano family, from the plain chant festivals led by a man called Professor King Griffin, to the sublime voice of a singer called Denise Chyla. And apart from John Liddy, the one person I would commend to you this evening when you leave here and you go to Spotify or whichever platform you use of music, please listen to Denise Chyla, a phenomenal performer, hip-hop performer now. She's a poet and a singer now working in Limerick. And it's John who ties all of these connections together. Given the musicality of Arias of Consolation, it's entirely fitting that aria is used in the title of the book. And the ghost voices of many singers surface across this poem. This, of course, is not at all surprising, given the importance of music and culture in the Liddy household. We heard at the outset a beautiful piece of music, a favourite of John's mother. John's mother nurtured his love of music, his love of reading. His father was a talented musician, playing in Limerick, playing at functions at Hamratty's Hotel and in many other venues across the city. James Joyce was mentioned earlier, and it's fitting that we mention James Joyce because it has been written about James Joyce that one of the things he had in mind about Ulysses was that if a nuclear bomb dropped on Dublin and it was decimated, Dublin could be rebuilt from reading Ulysses. Such was Joyce's attention to detail, the smell, the sounds, the messiness of Dublin. This is what I thought about when I read Arias of Consolation. Limerick City, and to a somewhat lesser degree, the county of Limerick, is the real star of Arias of Consolation. It is laden with references to people. Now, one of the things about Limerick, some people that I know have Limerick connections here and from Limerick originally, one of the great things about Limerick is that we speak Hiberno English. We speak a language which is influenced by colonization, influenced by French, influenced by Spanish, influenced by Gaelic, influenced by Gypsy or Traveller language. It's a really interesting place. We are top of the pops in terms of using irony. We are brilliant at irony in Limerick. And one of the great things about Limerick, and particularly working class language and culture in Limerick, is our use of nicknames, of giving somebody a nickname. My son, my youngest son, who is here with me in Madrid for these couple of days. I don't think he's ever met John, but he refers to him as the poet Liddy, right? This is only are you reading the poet Liddy? And we all have names for what we do. John talks about a real man who stood outside our school in Limerick called Paddy Sausage. Misfortune. A man called Francis Coleman who sat outside cinemas for many, many years, who had an encyclopedic knowledge of movies, of cinema. So he would sit begging for a few pennies to go to the movies. He would go to the movies and watch movie after movie, and if you asked him any question about a Hollywood film, an actor, who directed what, this man Francis Coleman could tell you. And John Liddy has captured and documented these men and women that are part and parcel of the experience of being in Limerick. So references to people, but also references to places. Pubs like Joe Malone's, the Tholso, Casey's Fish Shop. But Liddy's gaze doesn't write about Limerick in a kind of a soft, nostalgic way. Areas of Consolation evidences Liddy's warts and all knowledge of Limerick. While echoes of the past ripple through the poem, he's as comfortable writing about 21st century Limerick as he is thoroughly knowledgeable about its long and complicated past. It's abundantly clear. I mentioned about John coming home regularly, and it's good that he does. And I have a sense of John reading the Limerick Leader online, and maybe listening to Radio Air, listening to RT, and keeping in touch with home as well. And he has that kind of duality. Many migrants have, living in between the places that you were born in, or that you come from, or grew up in, and now where you reside. So it's abundantly clear that John is kept in contact with Limerick through contact with family, regular visits home, and through his reading and listening. Areas of Consolation works like a multi-layered mind map of the city and county. John Liddy is all at once an archaeologist, a lyrical stonemason, and a singer. His composition is a paean to a place which has been shamefully maligned and stigmatized too many times. Areas of Consolation is a song, like the best of songs, which work to soothe us. And in the words of Stephen Patrick Morrissey of the Smiths, it's a song to save our lives. In Areas of Consolation, Limerick is cast as a place in constant flux. It's a truly global post-industrial city. It has evolved and changed through the movement of people and through the changes in what people do to earn an everyday living in order to keep body and soul together. So whether it's Vikings sailing up the Shannon to form the city at the very beginning, or punk rockers returning from London on what was used to be called Slattery's bus, from those currently living in direct provision, to Shaw's pork butchers travelling to Moscow to show Russians how to cure bacon and ham, the ancient city of Limerick has borne witness to profound cultural and economic change. It is these migrations, these tensions, these fissures, which make Limerick a really interesting place. Such changes, upheavals, and Mark E. Smith in The Fall talks about reverberations. Remember him through his reverberations when he's dead. It's the reverberations that are indelibly linked on the language of the city of Limerick and how its many inhabitants speak. The predominance, as I mentioned a moment ago, of Hiberno English, how we decode, how we interpret accents in Limerick in terms of a person's class, their social class, their economic status, or their ethnicity, and the way in which tone is used in the spoken word should be of particular interest to anyone who seeks to make sense of the city and county of Limerick. Now, I was particularly glad when I was writing the introduction to this book that I was back and forth to John a little bit about the introduction, and I mentioned in my introduction that my maternal grandmother, a woman called Bridget Kennedy, from the South Liberties in Limerick, and again connected John with her own family, she had a great word when we were children. If we were very noisy, if we were staying in our nana's house, our granny's house, and if we were very noisy, our nana would throw us out of the house and she'd say, "Get out of the house, go out to the garden. You won't make a randy-boo of this place." And I never knew what that word meant. It was a great word, but I kind of knew what it meant, right? And later on, of course, I realised that it was from the word rendezvous. And here is this working class woman who left school at 10 years of age, not educated in a formal sense, but she used words from Gaelic, from traveller language, from French, in her everyday speech. And it's those kinds of nuances that John Liddy expertly captures. So my grandmother's use of the word rendezvous, from rendezvous as I said, is a simple example of how everyday language is replete with references to external influences. So Liddy's wonderful poem explicates and celebrates many words that are heard in everyday Limerick language. Words which are often to be found in Gaelic, in Irish, in traveller, shelta or cant, or increasingly in the language of migrants who have settled in Limerick over the centuries. So in this regard, John writes of the hybrids used by bleachers, ball hoppers, crushers, dabbers, dingers, dredgers, scalpers, slingers, spacers and crawthumpers, who were only gagging for it with a knobber in the gob, urging you to be wide of being nabbed by a gowl bag when cogging the ecker. Although neither John Liddy nor myself have lived in our shared parish of origin for nearly 4 decades, reading John Liddy's work has strongly influenced how I see and how I remember our shared locale. John Liddy's arias of consolation are, as I've described it in the introduction, a reservoir of consolation. The arias of consolation sing to our memories, our hurts, our loves, our disappointments. They map the minutiae of Limerick, tracing the lines of its lanes, its rows, its bows. Like a hazel rod, they divine hidden streams, trenches, and of course, because of Rathban, fairy forts. They tell stories, as you've heard, of ball hoppers. So if you're a ball hopper in Limerick, you're a person who likes to, make fun, have jokes, send people up, and so on. Crawl thumpers, your craw is your tummy, your stomach. So if you're a crawl thumper, you're kind of an overly zealous religious person. And alicadoos, somebody who pretends to understand rugby. And of course, rugby in Limerick is more important than religion. Arias of Consolation does all of these things. It invoices the experiences of the voiceless. The arias name names like the wonderful Dodo Redden and Pinky Downey. They unveil Limerick as a complex, multifaceted place which is never quite at peace with itself. Arias of Consolation is a truly powerful piece of writing which I warmly commend to you. Gar Mágat. Thank you so much.
No lo sé si merece la pena leer algo después de Sara, Miriam, Dominic y mil gracias a vosotros por sus palabras con Dominic, Miriam y Sara y mil huecos also. I'm going to read part 8, and part 8 of the book, as Owen pointed out, deals with accent and some slang, argot, professions, trades, areas, and some kind of local philosophy in Limerick. There are a lot of sayings. There was even reference to the pandemic before the pandemic hit. Christoph is going to accompany me on this. We're going to do this together with a beautiful old tune called Slán Lamá, Farewell to the Maig. The Maig is a river, flows off the Shannon around the area of Croom outside Limerick, and it's a farewell song. It's also in one way ties into my farewell or my returning to Limerick, and this is why we choose the music. Chris. One day I will go to Aaron Crusher, to appraise Sean Keating's paintings in the flesh, admire again the swans by the falls in Doon on Ace, the details in Lilburn's and O'Neill's maps, Torcore Town House from the 1450s, the Illin Lancholin from Windy Gaps. Go back to Sarsfield's Rock near St. Bridget's Church in Temple Braden and walk with Tom O'Grady without constraint through gaps in the hawthorns and talk of old beliefs discarded by science, the role of gods in the bought and sold of the modern world. Back for some more of the wherewithal from Mary Hatley and Nora McNamara, who helped me scale a boundary wall. Back to where I once held soft hands on summer walks with those who will always be young. Back to the Badlands where I fell with my cross on my knees as though in prayer. A dejected heart scald rising to face his woe, no longer ill at ease. Back for an earful of local anecdote to soften our cough for fear of losing the run of ourselves. Back for the fur coat and no knickers on the bus into town. From a gas card, not the full shilling, but no daw either. Always on for Gary Owen, for having been a while in the long grass and out of practice with the Ludine beside a Mia who was in a bad fuss. Molly fostered and kicked in the taws, Maria, all that cat's malaki, dog's tobacco, Randy Boo, a lusher's cause, who tells me he has a key in his backyard and other paraphernalia in a shed behind the pad, a nincompoop only too happy to drip dry me with more spoof, no sooner carved than licked, a man on his picky with notions galore. Back to the Unchuck with a bee in her bonnet and rain-paying flies in a bedsit, who knows all about paddy power and orange juice, electricity palpable between us. A jab of a nuke, Nuff said, the bee's knees, sensitivities incompatible. Back with a piper's welcome on the pig's back for the Pleraka, accosted on a thoroughfare by the plucker inn, selling ladies' items for interested Sheilas. A sheep's eye on skirt that passes brightly by. An old Segotia, a sham who piss takes. Sean Hannigan who'd shaft you as quick as a Shawneen. A sleeveen who slinges past the Shidog, always on the take. A Skooraloo for a sidekick. A smother of hair on his smig. A cat's lick upstairs. A smush smullicking for hard tack on a side door without 2 pennies to rub together. A gander at a galoot who suggested breeding 2 gondolas on the river. Back to where Chew said, find a man and a woman who have forgotten words so that I can talk to them. Where I can enjoy a grander sight, said a poet of the Tang dynasty, if I climb to a greater height. Where I would still find time in fair Luther King to plant an apple tree if the world fell out of rhyme. Where not even God can tell how another man's shoe is hurting him, to where the weakest willow binds the toughest wood. A delicate colt becomes a competent horse. Where a hungry castle is a deficit, and sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, but talk not fill the stomach. Where a silk purse is not a sow's ear, a ploughed field never done by thinking, the hen involved but the pig committed, its tail integral to the whole, to hide its value, the old man gone out to the donkey's home, idle as a piper's little finger, fit to be tied with an urge to hit out on the name of the father at a fly-by-night, weak as a gosling, but as boastful as a shop cat, with not as much as an amen in him, to where anything with the tongue can be done, knowledge no burden, talk put in a bottle by the young, who'd make a nest in your ear as quick as they'd look at you, but no a swallow not make a summer, whoever breaks pays, a knife not cut its own handle, or trouble not trouble until trouble troubles you, the test of the anvil with a spit, where thoughts behind a gift are what matter, to where I can call up the wind. I go back to find all is set to change again, back to a new beginning, a familiarity of recognizable range, a subtle vicissitude, back to never going back because you are always in me, your arias of consolation furrowing in my vein, your sights and sounds, my Gweaira, a windbag in that bewitching hour of put-downs and uplifts pertaining to birthright, Macushla meditating my sleep, persistent as tide and uplight, to write you for the oncoming fold, out of my spleen, where your fable will forever continue to be told, by a child straddling a Sheelawee outside the castle, a walk to Gillogue, across the Black Bridge, along Plassey and off the main drag for a spree with a wise old quail, a cut of a lumper modelled in bronze on Steamboat Quay, from where I am tempted to stray, with snatches of Doohan's voyage, Hanley's homeland a while to stay, taradiddles of Gurkey, Lanty on the run, explaining to his famished friends 'twas the eel that ate the rashers in the pan, a medium for the nixer and the tangler, nothing for the thorny wire with no spondulux, others on the tubber, whatever you're having yourself a Vic, says Gabriel, connoisseur of tawny, who once returned a tap to a smart Alec, back to fearless days without the near invisible corrupting a handshake, a cough on a bus, a sign of a phantom war, good times without the pounding of heavy artillery heard from Plitvich's nature reserve, peacetime and a striding beauty in summer without a care, bright-eyed as the dazzling waters gather in its threads, conjures a cape like a cumulus cloud, Feach na limnica, look at the coats, I hear her cry, as she points at a window display of Holman Lee models, the perfume there adrift along the street, where I am in awe of all that you were, are, will be, ethos, heritage, integrity, replete. Muchas gracias.
En el Ateneo es tradición que el público haga algunas preguntas al autor y la tradición no la podemos eludir, o sea que vuestra es la palabra.
Una pregunta muy básica, ¿dónde se consigue el libro?
En la puerta.
Oh, 1 minute, I get back there.
Yeah, John, you know, you write in these 3-line stanzas that I think are very powerful and they condense things, and you hear words chiming off each other. How did you hit on that? It's very interesting.
Sorry, Peter, what's this?
The 3-line stanza,
Yeah.
which I think is a very interesting.
Those,
How did you hit upon that?
the tercet 3-line approach is serves the purpose beautifully, in my opinion, because it's a musical structure. It's also I got the idea from Derek Walcott's book Long 600 pages long of a poem, and he uses the tercet structure, which helps the poem to move through 600 or so stanza verses. And Louis Byrne, my friend here, actually, I think, translated that poem into, no, but
No, I interviewed.
you interviewed him, sorry, he interviewed Derek Walcott, and I think Walcott makes a comment on the tercet, doesn't he? The three,
So, yeah.
and it's a very accessible structure for particularly the reader. If your poem, of a long poem like this, has got a page of a stanza, it's more difficult, page after page, rather than 3 lines, and rhyme helps as well, which is the purpose of rhyme in many ways, to add to the music and help the reader to move along with the flow of the poem. After all, it is the Shannon River talking at times, and there is a flow to the poem. Not only my voice is in there, but there are other voices, characters, as Sarah mentioned, and Dominic and Owen mentioned about the people and characters in the poem. So they're speaking, and their voices are helped along by those 3 lines, the tercet. I'd just like to say as well, what's helped me enormously in this poem is the music from Chris, and that Slán na Mall tune, plus the other tunes, but also me, Sabrina and Marina, who put this slideshow of photographs together, which I think, deserves a round of applause.
Oh, yeah.
To just change and move and so on. Anyway, I better stop there now.
If I ask a question?
No, I love one. This is my brother Liam. This is going to be a tough one.
Were you not tempted, like Eliot, for example, to use glossaries to explain some of the abstruse language that you use?
Yes, I was. But between Dominic and myself, I think it was decided that another 40 pages, at least. John O'Donnell maintains that it would go to about 55, 60 pages of explanation. So another 50 pages would not be economically...
So it was an economic decision, John.
Well,
Then we have to give a scholar something to do, think about those doctorates and
a good question, Liam. Dom has just said we might just do a glossary the next time. Just do a glossary. No poem, just a glossary. There are 2 answers to it. Christoph has come up with a good idea. We could do an online glossary for the book, which would save you a lot of money, actually. You don't have to spend any money on it, really. So we could do that. But I think what actually, in the back of my mind for this poem was that I really didn't want a glossary, to be honest. What I would do would be try and, maybe with the help of you and Louis there, we could work on a translation. I mean, Finnegan's Wake has been translated, Ulysses has been translated, very good translations, Ulysses into Spanish, Castellana. Maybe we could do a translation into Castellana, but my whole idea of the poem was to keep the mystery as well. Don't explain too much. That's why I'm reluctant to even talk about the poem, or you notice the way I sort of skipped over my little introduction to the part. I just don't feel comfortable talking about it. But a friend of mine, Dave Moore, suggested that an explanation into the poem would be helpful, and I think we're going to have to work on that.
Well, explaining poems is always a bad
tough one.
idea. It's a bad
It's a
thing.
tough one.
But the etymology of words might be, like, where does this word come from?
The but it's a long story. It's
I
like
know,
it
of
would
course
take
it
up too long to explain. If I was to go into an explanation here, I think Owen covered it, Dominic covered it, Sarah, but an explanation of so much stuff in there. I mean, for instance, the operas, the arias of consolation, the Eileen Mavoureen, that explanation was very quick. My mother liked to sing it. But actually, there's a far more profound explanation, which would take up too long. It comes from an opera, The Lily of Killarney. Those of us from Limerick know Gerald Griffith's novel, The Collegians, who was a young reporter reporting on the trial of John Scanlon, who murdered Eileen Hanley, who was 15 years of age, and John Scanlon was found. Daniel O'Connell defended John Scanlon in the courthouse in Limerick. Gerald Griffith reported on it. Scanlon was found guilty, he was hanged. His friend Sullivan was also hanged. This all took place in the 1830s, in the 1840s. But it led to a novel, a play, an opera, Dion Boucicault's opera, The Lily of Killarney. Julius Bennett on the libretto, the writing of it. Then it was actually, a film was made of it in 1913, a black and white. Then, of course, it figures in Joyce, as Sarah knows, and several times, as Sarah pointed out to me. I kind of only remember one reference, but there are several about the Lily of Killarney. Why was Joyce mentioning the Lily of Killarney? And for Joyce to explain that would take another, 50 pages of a glossary. So explanations would run too long, would take over too much time. When you stop with an explanation.
I've got a question though. Is there an Irish-English dictionary? Because I'm wondering about the terrain of these words.
Yeah.
Are they
There's
words
some very
that
good-
seeped out of Gaelic and are coming
There's some
into
very good
Irish
dictionaries.
English, or are they just spontaneous
No,
localisms that are growing out of Ireland in the same way you would have words in Scottish
Yeah.
that belong to Scottish English as well?
No, there's a growing amount of scholarship that traces corpus. So like they're really interesting pieces of research, academic research, which literally have gathered thousands of words, and then they've gone behind them to document where they have come from. And like I mentioned a few, and John, when he was reading there, he moved between Queen's English, Hiberno English. He used words that come from a traveller language, and oftentimes the words in traveller language are simply Irish words from Gaelic or words from English, and the spelling has been played with. So the Gaelic word for, the Irish word for work is uber, and in Shelta, in Traveller Cant, the word is grubber. We would refer to a young woman as a lassie.
Yeah.
Probably not anymore, thankfully, but that phrase it would be used, whereas in traveller language it's a lassie. So, but yes, there are lots of ways now that you can track the words. But what I was thinking about was, the kind of facetious answer is, if you did a glossary, you would kill the PhD industry, so you don't want to be doing that. But I was also thinking that, if you look at somebody like, I've written a lot about David Bowie in my other kind of academic role. I've written a lot about David Bowie and the influences on David Bowie. And I'm doing a lot of work at the moment about Bowie's interest in Jack B. Yeats. And particularly, I'm writing a lot at the moment about Bowie's interest in and his use of Samuel Beckett. So Bowie plunders Samuel Beckett. And so he takes phrases and words, and even the cinematography in his last couple of videos, right? Bowie's so well read. But in one sense, decoding it and listing things and pointing things out, and I certainly wouldn't expect David Bowie or an artist or any artist to explain this means this and this is where this came from, because I think that the fun is in the interpretation and the sifting through.
Yeah.
That's where the really interesting stuff is.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Bueno, pues la consolación es una obra de misericordia espiritual. Gracias por consolarnos. Thank you, Miriam. Y estamos todos perdonados y qué grandes estamos esta tarde. O sea que, buenas tardes. Adiós.